Welcome back to My Hero Month, where I'll be making a month's worth of content focused on My Hero Academia. For all you who are returning, thanks for coming back, and for those of you who are new, I recommend checking out the first video I did on this subject, since this one is kind of a sequel, as we dig into the progress that Tomura Shigaraki is making towards his quest of becoming the greatest villain. You gotta love to be gone back yet. Love turns into having, don't you grab it. So in my first video essay and second most successful video on this channel, I did a little character breakdown of My Hero Academia's main villain, Tomura Shigaraki. I went into why I like his current character arc, and how it serves as a parallel with Deku's journey to become the greatest hero, with Shigaraki working to become the greatest villain. But he's an awful villain. Not because he's a bad person, but because he's just awful at being a villain. But that was sort of the point. Well, it's been nearly a year and a lot has happened in the manga, so I figured it couldn't hurt to take a look at him and give a reassessment on how Tomura is doing on his quest to become the greatest villain. So of course we'll be discussing a lot of spoiler material, so if that's something you want to avoid, here's your warning. So if I had to give him a villain grade previously, I'd say he was about a D+, mostly because he hadn't accomplished anything impressive. His two villainous acts were the attack on the UA Training Center and his attack with the Nomus in Hosu City, but both of those actions were suppressed by professional heroes. They were a waste of resources that didn't accomplish anything. In fact, what really pushed him ahead wasn't anything he did on his own, but the actions and conviction of the hero killer Stain, whose popularity gave a boost towards Shigaraki's League of Villains. Of course, Shigaraki, being the little edgelord that he is, doesn't take kindly towards the free publicity or the opportunity that it provided him, and lashes out against all the new recruits coming to join the League. So one of the best moments of the series so far, he goes to Deku to learn why the world respects the hero killer more than him. And it's here where Deku potentially makes the biggest mistake in his hero career by giving Shigaraki the advice he needs to hear most.
I don't understand you. Your goals. And your villains. I don't agree with anything you do. Because the hero killer and I have something in common. We're inspired by All Might. He's a maniac. But he doesn't destroy things just because it sounds fun. Even if the way he acted was wrong. He held true to his beliefs. That's the difference.
It's him. The problem is All Might. Oh, I'm glad we had this chat. I feel better. I can't thank you enough, Midoriya.
Now Tomura has a greater purpose, understanding that his acts must contribute to a larger goal, a grand thesis, and that's the main material I covered in my last video. But the problem is, he's still terrible at being a villain, and we see how bad he is in the next arc. During the school trip arc, Tomura sends dozens of new villains to attack the heroes in training at UA during their field training. His ultimate goal is to kidnap Bakugo to see if he can convince him to join the League of Villains, and see if he has enough charisma to turn him evil. Tomura fails miserably, as his plan to convert Bakugo literally blows up in his face. Essentially, he wasted dozens of underlings, many of which of them had very powerful and dangerous quirks, just to get one guy. A guy who he completely fails to convert towards his side. Despite his growth, he still doesn't quite have the charisma level of someone like the Joker in terms of getting people to join his side. To make matters worse, his little endeavor got the attention of Pro Hero Endeavor, as well as all the other top 5 pro heroes who led a hero raid on his hideout base, completely obliterating his organization. And if it wasn't for the intervention of his mentor, All For One, that would have been the end of him. So for all intents and purposes, Tomura is still terrible at his job. Even when he tries to move with purpose, he still wastes countless resources and accomplishes nothing. But as Yoda said in The Last Jedi,
"Heeded my words not, did you? Pass on what you have learned. Strength, mastery, but weakness, folly, failure also. Yes, failure most of all. The greatest teacher, failure is."
And if failure is the greatest teacher, then Tomura has had the greatest crash course in becoming the best villain. It's after the hideout raid arc where we see the greatest growth in Tomura. As opposed to doing big, flashy, attention-grabbing acts of destruction, he goes underground to build up forces and start moving in the shadows. It's here where Tomura meets his greatest foil and Yakuza villain, Chisaki. Now, Chisaki's great because he's everything Tomura isn't. He's a much more handsome guy, he's a better, more charismatic leader whose underlings would choose death over betraying his trust. They love him so much that they even follow his example and adopt the Plague Doctor bird mask aesthetic that he uses. While the overall status of the Yakuza in My Hero universe is diminished, Chisaki runs a tight ship and for all intents and purposes is a much more effective villain than Tomura ever could be. He has a larger plan, he has a small army of lethal goons who are willing to die for him, he has a quirk that is a much better version of Shigaraki's, given the fact that he can destroy and reform things with just a touch. It's obvious that Tomura should hate his guts, just like how we all hate that guy we used to go to college with, but now all we can do is see him in our Facebook feed as he humble brags about his new high-paying tech job and all the vacations he takes with his hot girlfriend around the globe. But with failure being his greatest teacher, Shigaraki has learned the virtue of patience and probably his greatest growth in becoming a villain. He manages to suck up his pride and disgust towards Chisaki in order to ally with him for a greater goal. In this scene, we see his greatest growth. The other members of the Alliance of Villains are all wondering why he decides to work with the Yakuza, and he takes off his facepalm mask and reveals his face to his underlings, and it's a completely calm expression with no rage or malice. It's the first time we've ever seen him looking calm. He explains his actions, that the plan is for his sake and all the people working under him, as well as for the sake of making a better world for all of them. And it's this scene where he grows beyond just being a petulant child looking to burn the world, where he finally gains the charisma of a leader and wins the unflinching loyalty of all the villains working under him. This is where he moves away from being a little edgelord into becoming a criminal mastermind, and gains the charisma he's sorely lacking when he tried to convert Bakugo to his cause. This is probably the biggest step he's taken towards becoming the greatest villain, and while technically during this crucial arc he doesn't really do much other than lend a few subordinates to Chisaki, his patience and charisma pays off towards the end of the arc. After Chisaki is defeated and being taken away by the police, Tomura leads a raid to ambush his convoy. This is where we see huge changes to his character and approach. Not only is he wearing a bitchin' trench coat, but he's also taking a direct role in the raid, jumping into the fray himself, which is a complete 180, especially from where we saw him in the UA raid, where all he did was let all the other villainous cannon fodder go first, and he largely stayed on the sidelines for most of the conflict. Now he sees that the best way to inspire loyalty towards his cause is to actually take direct action himself, and it's here where he wins his final savage victory against Chisaki while barely lifting a finger. He steals away his life work of creating the quirk-destroying bullet and rips off his hands by destroying both of his arms. Without doing any work, he's devastated his rival and takes his most prized asset. It's a moment worthy of a supervillain. A moment where carefully calculating the shadows work far better towards his larger goal than a flashy, empty display that could be easily suppressed. So if I had to grade him now, I'd give him a C+ on my villain competency scale. Tomura has grown a great deal and learned a lot, but he doesn't have any major victories, yet. Despite his numerous failures and losses, he's still managed to grow, but he still needs to win before he can become something like a legitimate threat. I'm still rooting for him, and I do think he has the potential to become the best villains ever seen in shonen manga, but he needs to accomplish something so he can be considered to be a legitimate threat. Personally, what I look for in a villain are two major things. I like competency. I like them to be an established threat, so when they do something, you know shit is going to go down. It's what separates villains like Joker and Darkseid from more pedestrian villains who are designed to be beat and dealt with in less than 22 minutes. I also like villains that enjoy what they do. Joker is a great villain because no matter what he's doing, he always looks like he's having an absolute blast. Tomura so far isn't great at what he does, and for the most part looks miserable, but in the critical scene where he finally gets the upper hand on Chisaki, not only is he showing himself as a threat, but he looks like he's having a blast by finally one-upping his sexy boy rival, and that's why the scene was really fun in the manga and shows great promise for his future. But we need to see him get a 100% win, not a Pyrrhic victory where he has to sacrifice half of his minions to capture one guy. He needs a flat-out, undisputable victory, something that establishes him as a society-destabilizing threat. He is being built up as a sort of criminal mastermind whose charisma and plotting abilities are far more important than his pure combat skills, and the internship arc did a great job of establishing him learning the lessons of patience and planning. Hopefully we'll see him reap the rewards in later arcs and become the villain this series deserves. Like I've said before, I think he has the potential to become an all-time great villain, but the two things he'll need to ensure that, which are an awesome backstory and some victories to add to his belt. This guy needs to win. He needs to absolutely crush some of our young heroes, and until he manages to do that, he will just be an empty glass of potential waiting to be filled. But I'm still rooting for him, and while his growth has been slow, it's obvious that Horikoshi is playing the long-style Blackbeard villain game in terms of building up his legend. So like many of you, I'm eagerly awaiting the eventual payoff. Who knows, maybe this time next year, when Season 4 of My Hero Academia is about to start up, I'll make another video to see if he's finally gotten it. But until then, I'll keep rooting for the most handy villain to ever grace a shonen anime. Hope you enjoyed this video, as you're eagerly awaiting the next episode of Season 3. I'll have a new video ready next Friday, so I hope to see you then. Until then, feel free to keep yourself busy by checking out my previous My Hero Academia video essays.